Yes.
There was some question at the beginning about the message that was sent out, some confusion. We're still going to be on this Zoom. And some people were thinking we were going to go off Zoom.
Well, that's my responsibility. Apparently, I did not communicate clearly, so let me try again. Every week, I send out videos or articles that people might view in preparation for our sessions. And I, as an experiment, am putting those on Facebook alone. I've been putting them on Facebook all along and then sending out a message as well. But I'm hoping people will go to Facebook, or an easier way would be to go to our website, bransonlegacysabbathschool.com, and all the videos I sent out during the week are there. So this is a way on my part of trying to decrease the number of emails you get from me, but it applies only to that. We will still meet on Zoom for our sessions, and we will still archive our sessions on YouTube so that people can see them later. So it's just that little bit of material. And I think one of my motives is that quite a few people look at them on Facebook, and maybe only 10 or so look at them when I send the links out. So I thought, well, I'll put more emphasis on where people are watching them and maybe a little less where they're not watching them. In any case, we meet here on Zoom until we go back to the building, and we will continue to meet on Zoom when we do that, because we don't want to miss other people that we've gained along the way. So thank you for bringing that up. One more time, only thing that has changed are the videos or links, and I'm sending those to Facebook. If this doesn't work, we'll go back to sending out another email every week.
Yeah, I think the issue was, David, some people don't have Zoom and they don't plan to have Zoom.
Oh, you mean they don't have Facebook and don't?
I'm sorry, they don't have Facebook and they don't plan to have Facebook.
Right. I heard from one or two people to that, and they don't want to get on social media at all. But they also said to me that going to the website we have, bransonlegacysabbathschool.com, and accessing the videos that way works. So one does not have to have Facebook. One can just go to our website. That's another advantage. People might go to the website more often and see what's going on there. So, yeah, we don't want to make people join social media if they're not wanting to do that. Okay, anything else for us?
No, that's all that I can think of right now.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to Monty and to Brunman, everybody behind the scenes making this work. Now, last week after our session, George Tichy, I think that's the right way to say it. For me, it rhymes almost with fishy, but George Tichy, Dr. Fishy, psychologist, wrote me a story of his own from his experience, and I asked him to share that with the group, and he's going to do that right now. Over to you, George.
Okay, thank you again, Dr. Bruinsma, for your presentation. Thank you, David, for learning to say Tichy. My comment, my brief story will be about, is related to the sentiments toward the Catholics. As Adventists, we have been trained, or I would say brainwashed, to keep some negative sentiments toward the RCC. And I want to go back to the year, I guess, 1981. I was a member of a church about 50 kilometers from São Paulo city in Brazil. And I was there only for 1 year after being in our school for a long time. And one Friday night, the church was robbed, and the guys who did it, they just went there at night, Friday night, and they used some candles not to call the attention with turning on the lights, and they left the candles there, and making it short, the church was burned down. totally. And so we were looking for a place to congregate, and people would not go to movie theaters or so like this. That would be too sinful. And then I was in charge of that part as a lay person, lay member. But the priest offered us one of his churches. And we accepted that, the Catholic priest, and we attended there. Probably we met for about 3 or 4 months while we rebuilt our church. We didn't pay for that a penny. We didn't, it was just marvelous. Of course, there was a lot of criticism for that. How can you take people to the church there and all that? The Catholics, and our enemies, and they're going to persecute us. All those stories that we know well. But after our church was rebuilt, I invited him to the first service there and asked him to even say some words. He did. And of course, there was a lot of criticism on that too. But I think that we have to rethink our feelings and sentiments regarding to the Catholics. And I wonder if the church, our church, will ever do that officially, or if we will keep insisting in telling people things about the RCC that are like a great controversy in the book, and that concerned me a lot. But I hope it can change and we can reconcile with them as well. That's my little story.
Thank you, Dr. Tichy. Yeah, the thing I like about that story is twofold. One is that it speaks well of that Roman Catholic priest and the congregations that he led. Sounds like he had more than one. And secondly, that the Adventists were willing to accept that generosity. One could imagine either of those or both of those not having taken place. And this is directly related to one of the questions on Dr. Bruinsma's list for today. And that is, could our relationships with the Catholics change, particularly when they deal with us in a matter of generosity rather than in a matter of persecution? So it's right on target for today, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. Okay, David, over to Mickey. Go ahead. David, somebody said something.
May I just comment on what Brother Tichy said? And I was once sent on a mission to Kuwait. We have a small Adventist church there, but our pastor was there actually illegal. And he was there under the guise of a computer consultant. And it was my task to ask the government there whether we could maybe send in an official pastor. But they told us, no, we are not giving any permissions. There are a few churches that have historically the permission to have some priest or pastor there, but we are not adding to that. But then he said, go talk to the other churches. Maybe they have a slot that you can use. So I went to the evangelical church there in Kuwait, mostly immigrants. But the pastor said, well, no, I really can't do that because that would be misunderstood if we helped you, because your members always tell us that we are part of Babylon and they really don't like that. And so I went finally to the Catholic bishop. He was somebody who had come from Malta, and he was very friendly, and he invited me to come for a meal in the evening. And he said, we can help you. I said, yeah, well, there may be a problem. Maybe our members, Adventists, would have a problem with, Catholics helping. because you may know that, there are some members in our church who are not really that pro-Catholic. Yeah, he says, I know, I understand. I actually have some members who don't like Protestants. He says, but, I can help you. And so eventually it was the Anglican Church, actually, but through his help, we were able to get permission for a pastor to go to Kuwait. But yeah, he was quite willing. And actually for a long time, the pastor that we had in Algeria was there courtesy of the Catholic Church.
Right, these are very encouraging stories. Very encouraging. Norma, go ahead.
I said, because I lived in Kuwait for 6 years. When was that?
That was in around 2000, I think.
Oh, I see. I was there 1968 to 24.
It was around 2000, 2001. It was actually one of my last trips that I made for the Trans-European Division, because that was then part of the Trans-European Division territory. Yeah. But we had about 200 members there at that time, mostly people from other Middle Eastern countries and Pakistan. And on Friday evening, I had a question and answer session with that church. I said, you don't get visitors from the church all that often. Ask what you want to. That's, of course, dangerous. And most of the questions, that were asked were, believe it or not, about whether we can have a Christmas tree. And I remember being so actually depressed that they're in a country where 99% at least is Muslim, that the main concern seemed to be whether we can actually have a Christmas tree, yes or no. But that's another story.
Thank you both, Norma and Reinder. These stories are, on the one hand, very encouraging. On the other hand, very thought-provoking, very perplexing. Sometimes, as Reinder said, depressing. On Facebook, Clifford Goldstein has made a comment or two. He's the one who he makes our quarterlies for the Sabbath School. And I think he'll be happy to know that next week we begin a series on Isaiah, and Dr. Bernard Taylor will be it. I've asked Dr. Taylor to do it on the 3 Isaiahs, and I'm not necessarily signing up to the idea that there are 3 Isaiahs, but I do think it's helpful to look at the 3 portions of Isaiah in a focused way so that we see what is offered distinctively in each portion. So we'll go to that next time. But in any case, Elder Goldstein says on this that, yes, this is a thoroughly biblical doctrine, not based on Ellen White, thoroughly biblical, I think is what he means. And secondly, that it is credible. So biblical and credible. Those are the 2 messages I'm getting from Dr. Goldstein just now. Okay, now I'll answer my question and then we'll go to McKinley. That is, I do think it would be possible to be an Adventist 1,000 years from now, but it would require us to change what it means to be an Adventist from time setting to thinking in a different way, a kind of apocalyptic consciousness, people say in the Guild, or maybe an expectancy mindset. That would be what would be, I think, at stake here. Okay, over to McKinley.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Elder Bruinsma, for your thoughtful and enriching presentations. For me, they reaffirm Adventist understanding of the second coming. I think as a community of believers, acknowledging spiritual insights to understand the circumstances and conditions of the time is a blessing. With respect to Dave's request to share a development on a prior class discussion of the Adventist Christian stewardship on climate emissions impacts, I want to do so in the context of Elder Bruinsma's presentations on Christ's second coming with two quick comments. Going back to the first presentation on the certainty of Christ's return, my sense is Christ must return because the promised resurrection is inextricably linked to the second coming. No second coming, no resurrection. But more, and I think if we entertain the idea that Christ won't return, the consequence is that there won't be a resurrection of the saints. And that's food for thought. But I think more importantly, the second coming must happen because God keeps his word and his track record is dependable. Second, Dave asked, what might Adventist Christians living 500 years from now and then today, 1,000 years from now, do or think if Christ hasn't returned by then? My thinking is that although it is desirable that the Lord returns even today, if this return isn't until 500 years from now, it provides more opportunity and more time to keep working. It provides more time to model to contemporaries what life in Christ as an Adventist Christian is like. It provides more time to model the powerful impacts and the outcomes of Adventist education on the world, such as what happens in a Branson Sabbath School class discussion of climate emissions and their ecological impacts. Now the news. So you'll remember this class discussion about driving at 65 miles an hour whenever safe and reasonable as a personal stewardship response to help cut climate emissions. Well, based on the class feedback and that exercise, and also feedback from other colleagues, that analysis is being expanded to California and US households. And a technical paper has been proposed on the topic, and an abstract was accepted by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers for presentation to their International Mechanical Engineering Congress sometime later this year. And so this is one example, I think, of how Adventist Christians can impact the world while we wait for the Lord's return. A second quick example of the impact that Adventist education can have in the world while we wait is that another leading industry organization has asked me to peer review a very bold claim by one researcher that the conventional understanding of the thermodynamic cycles governing the operation of internal combustion engines need correcting. The implications are profound for climate emissions. If the research claims are validated, it could, and the insights implemented, it could be one pathway to cut transportation emissions by 40%. And for me, again, without the Lord's blessings and without my Adventist education, without the ministry of the Adventist Church, I don't think I would be in this position to have these opportunities. So thank you, David. That's a little exciting news that David wanted me to share.
I think it's very exciting. I'm so pleased that our class is having a relationship with the wider world. With our support of Norma Nashed's Restore a Child, we're reaching out, and just think that a Sabbath school discussion that we had is ending up in a journal called the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. That's really a good thing to think about. So thank you, McKinley, and thank you for the work that you're doing that we don't hear about as often, but it's all very, very important. Now, I think we are over. I think it's time to go to Forrest. Do you have somebody for us, Brother Howe? I don't see.
Okay, here I am.
Okay.
I'm sorry, my picture flipped around and I didn't know where it was. Anyway, okay. At this time, I want to go to Danilo. So, Danilo?
Thank you. I'm so glad that I was here for this beautiful presentation on the Second Coming. It has been quite a while since I've actually heard a good presentation on Second Coming. For some reason, we don't preach it very much of late. I don't know why that is. It's a little bit strange. Anyhow, thank you so much. The thing that struck me was, as you pointed out numerous times, that in the end, what we have is faith, hope, and love. And as I was listening to those words, I couldn't help but feel a sense of, how should I say, this isn't fair. It's somehow wrong that's all we got. I would wish that it included something like, yes, in the end, what you have is victory and strength and success and fortitude, and everything that you do will go well. Unfortunately, that is not the way things go. And that got me to thinking, why is it, and this is the general principle of the battle between good and evil. This goes to the core of this struggle. Why is it that love somehow has to yield the right of way to selfishness? Why is it that somehow the righteous always have to receive the hits and survive and endure and wait for the salvation to come? Why is it that Moses had to hold up his arms so that Israelites would prevail? Who was holding up the arms for the Amalekites? Why is it that the Amalekites win by default? Do you see the nature of the problem? It always seems to put God and good on the back foot. But when I think about faith, hope, and love, it occurs to me that all three of those always involve someone else. It is a looking towards another. It is not a self-satisfaction or how should I say, selfishness. Somebody who's faithful is faithful to something and someone else. Someone who's hopeful is hoping to see some good around with all the other people. And someone who loves always loves someone. It is not selfishness. Ultimately, it strikes me that faith, hope, and love are grounded in truth, and in their purest form are truth embodied in different forms. In contrast to that, selfishness has basically a self-deception and blindness and lack of truth. So the conflict between good and evil, in some sense, culminates in the second coming. But the reason why the second coming is necessary is to put to close the sorry chapter on this conflict.
Okay, thank you so much. And let's see what Dr. Bruinsma has to say. It sounds to me like the theodicy issue here is front and center, and I do think that that's an important matter. Dr. Bruinsma, what do you have to say on this?
Well, I think that I can only agree with what has been said. Maybe I would just like to say that when when you say that it seems that the righteous are always getting the hits. That may seem to be the case. But the question is, how many of the righteous are still giving the hits? And that is the challenge for us, that, you know, we can look at all the things that are wrong and the lack of love and the lack of hope and et cetera, et cetera. But then the only useful thing is to turn it towards ourselves and say, okay, what is then the way I need to live in this particular time? And whether it's a year or whether it's 5 years or 500 years, and as David increased it today to 1,000 years, you know, if we continue with the series, if we were to, he might even put the number higher. But that is not the main issue, I think. The main issue is, okay, how does that impact me? How can I, by the grace of God, be the kind of person that is really expectant and that is really using the opportunities that I get, actually using them well? I would also like to just make a little remark to Brother McKinley about the 65 miles. You know, that is 100 kilometers an hour. And we here in the Netherlands, we need to reduce the emissions, of course, by a very significant amount, because we are very much committed to the Paris climate deal. And last year, in order to really try to get to those goals, a law was passed that on all the ways, all the highways in the Netherlands, the maximum speed is 100 kilometers. So, you know, you drive in Germany and you drive 200, and when you come at the border, you know, it's 100, because we want to reach the goal of the emissions.
Even if you have BMW.
Yeah. Even if
May I just say something, Forrest, in response to Elder Reinder?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Yes, Elder Reinder, thank you for sharing that thought. It's very interesting that when this conversation about reducing climate emissions from the transportation sector comes up, there are so many people wanting to comment on it. And so it's good to hear that the Netherlands has taken this step to at least set that speed limit for 65 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour. We don't expect that necessarily has to be the driver here in the States, but what this analysis has shown and what the Sabbath School class discussion has shown is that it triggers a lot of responses rather, and motivation for people to really look at this option.
Okay. All right. Thank you. In the chat, can you hear me okay? Okay, in the chat box, Elmer Capino, our resident psychiatrist, made a comment. Elmer, would you like to bring out your comment up about the church getting off the hook?
I had, can you hear me?
I can.
George had brought up the fact that he is looking forward to the time when the church can come to a rapprochement with the Catholic Church. And I mentioned that can only be achieved when we reach a level of maturity where we can accept our own faults, because this defense mechanism basically is a projective mechanism. We project our problems, our difficulties onto the external world instead of saying I made a mistake. So once we do that, we run out of fuel, and then we can face the true problem. The true problem is we struggle with our own deficiencies, and that's the mechanism behind why we diminish others and we try to do good.
Okay, did you want to respond to that, Reinder?
No, I think I would like to think that's true. There's usually, more than one factor involved, but it's certainly true that certainly also in the relationships, not only with individuals, but also with other organizations, the word of Christ applies, that we should look at the plank in our own eyes before we try to remove the splinter from the other eyes. Now, we may think that it's the splinter in our eyes and the plank in somebody else's eye, but the point is that, yes, before we are so critical of others, it may be a priority to be a little bit more critical about some of the things that we say and do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I want to go to Rodney.
I want to start by deferring just briefly to Ron Grabo. What Ron would often tell us during his presentations was that words are important. I want to bring into focus two words that actually Bud introduced in the rest period, the timeout period. And I announced to this class when I first joined this class about 3 years ago, after a 30-year absence from Sabbath school, that I was wanting to begin a journey from blessed hope to blessed assurance. I felt that hope was for the hopeless, as you used that expression, and I was done living in a world with a hand-wringing, vague sense, desperate sense of hope amongst my Adventist community. It was not going to attract me back into Adventism, or would it hold me. So I embarked on this journey of increasing my knowledge, of learning, and moving down this continuum of belief to a position of certainty, to a position of assurance. And frankly, Randy, your books have very much helped me with that journey. They increased my certainty of return. I don't know if it's going to be Jesus. I don't know if it's God. I don't know if it's going to be Jesus' son or God's son or somebody else, but somebody has to come back and finish what they started here. The key thing that you said today that was very important in my journey was the signs are directional. They're not events and destinations. You have to dismantle that piece of it. Otherwise you get drawn into, is it now? Is it next week? Is it George Bush? Was it Reagan? Was it Obama, or was it Trump? And there's all kinds of event-driven things that people cling to. And I'm certainly not there, as you aren't there. It's about a direction, not about a destination or events or time. So I want to know why you didn't end your session with, we have this assurance. I can't go back to floundering in a vague sense of hope. I've come too far. I live in a world of assurance and certainty. That's where my journey has taken me. So I'm really interested as to where you are on a scale between hope and assurance, if you would share that with us.
Okay. I actually, in my feeling, in the way I use those words, they are synonymous. And that is in some of the quotations that I used in the end, coming from the theologian of hope, Jurgen, what's his name, Moltmann, and the other one that I quoted, that hope that is nurtured by faith, that is the assurance of things that we cannot see, but we are sure will come about. Now, also, I should say that in my language, that word assurance, we don't have the exact equivalent for that. So yes, certainty, Zekerheit, in German, Sicherheit, Sicherheit. So words are very important, and sometimes, in the English language, you have about twice the number of words that we have in Dutch, and in most languages. But I'm very happy for you to actually make this addition or correction or whatever it is, to say yes, hope, not in terms of something that is vague. I hope that I will, get to win a lottery or something, or I hope whatever. No, this hope, this Christian hope, is much more. That is assurance. Yeah, you're very right. So, okay. Yeah. So thank you very much for mentioning that.
And thank you for your wonderfully structured presentations. Very much appreciated.
It has been a real pleasure. And, when you make that remark that some of the things that I have written have helped you, that is a great encouragement. Because, if you are writing in and talking in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and sometimes are not exactly saying what everybody likes to hear, then there's a lot of things that you have to, that just come your way. But then to hear from time to time, okay, what you're doing has some value, and it has given me some thoughts. It has helped me a little bit. You make my day.
Your expression of warranted belief is something that I use all the time with the Christian friends that I interact with. And to me, it's kind of a cornerstone of thinking. Very, very helpful, very useful.
Okay.
Great utility.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. I think I go to Roger McQuiston now.
Thank you, Elder. I certainly appreciated this series, and every subject every week causes me to do a lot of thinking. My one thought had to do with the fear that people have of the second coming. And I have been visiting seniors for the last 13 years almost here at the University Church. And inevitably, the second coming comes up in the conversation. That definitely is a hope of our seniors. But I do find the fear is in the events that take place before he comes. Mm-hmm. The 7 last plagues, the time of trouble, and the thought, I hope I die before that. I don't think I'd be strong enough to go through it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just wondering, what's your answer to people who have that fear? Because do we believe the 7 last plagues are going to take place? Do we believe there's going to be a very terrible time before Jesus comes back? Just how do you allay that kind of fear for those who feel that way?
Well, the fact that we have this fear is something that is so ingrained in us. My parents were Adventists, and when I was a teenager, I began to understand a little bit about what our church was about. But then, I sometimes prayed, Lord, make sure that this is the right kind of church, because otherwise we're in trouble. And, the fear that you are not in the right party. After all, I think many people take with them throughout their life. Is this actually where I should be? Is this okay? Am I not mistaken? That is one source of fear. Then the fact that, we talk so much also in our evangelism, for instance, about all the terrible things that will happen. And well, I hesitate to say it, but when I look at, for instance, that big schema, what is the British word? Schedule of last day events, then I would say, well, there's so much speculation there. Where does all this come from? Can you really, when you read the Bible and when you try to feed your own soul, can you really deduce that from reading the Bible? I can't. And when I read, for instance, the book of Revelation, then what I sense is, yes, there's going to be trouble, but God sees us through. And that's the kind of thing that we should emphasize, that if we commit ourselves to him, he is committed to us. And so, well, there's all kinds of texts that you can cite, of course, that we're not going to be tempted above what we can, etc., etc. That's all true. But basically, if I'm committed to him, and even before I make that commitment, he is committed to me. And that is, I think, what we should try to convey. We should, by the way we talk, by the way we live, by the way we communicate, give people the sense that is something that gives us the strength, that gives us the assurance, to use the word that was just used by Brother Rodney. So, but it's a long way to go, because it is not just with Seventh-day Adventists, it is with many conservative Christians. And I think I mentioned it in one of the talks a couple of weeks ago, that in one of the most conservative Christian pockets in the Dutch Bible Belt, that is where the people are afraid to die. That is where they have so much, fear that in the end, what they were was not good enough. No, we are not good enough. But fortunately, there is one who is good enough. But yeah, it's a difficult point, because it takes away a lot of joy by many people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We got another chat. Larry Beeson, would you want to comment on your response on the chat?
Well, I was just commenting that, this reduction down to 65 miles per hour, that the Air Quality Management District had a forum where it's called Faith, the leaders of the faith communities. And we had several pastors and people from Loma University School of Public Health talk about how the air pollution is affecting our health. And that was just a comment that there's a lot of things that we can do as far as reducing our air pollution by driving less. And I just made the comment that the reduction in driving in the early stages of the pandemic, that there was a marked decrease in heart attack rates. And in the School of Public Health, the Adventist Health and Smog Study, which we've been conducting for the last 40 years or so, have found that air pollution affects heart attack rates, cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, all-cause mortality, and a variety of health outcomes. So it's very good, important to reduce our ambient air pollution.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Peter, come to you now.
Thank you again, Dr. Bruinsma, for your presentation. And I want to assure you that we are going to miss you. The first comment, I like to reflect a little bit on our relationship with the Roman Catholics. I have a personal experience in connection with that. In 1980, I was in camp with my family in Austria, camp for refugees in our way to the United States. And in the camp, there are a few organizations that were helping the refugees to immigrate for the next step to the country that was accepting them. And we have to put our names on a Catholic organization called Caritas that was paying for our flight to the United States and for our lodging in New York, where we arrived, and then to continue our flight to California. Of course, in some time, in a few years, gradually we paid what this organization helped us pay for us. We didn't have, our church didn't have an organization to help the refugees in camp. And it was a good experience, and I think we have to cooperate with them in what is good. And we have to recognize that they're doing some good in the world. I definitely appreciate very much the role that John Paul II, the Pope, the Polish Pope, played in the fall of communism. I personally appreciate that from our personal experience living in the East Bloc, in the Eastern Europe. The second comment that I like to make is in regard to some reflections that David made at the end of our Sabbath school last Sabbath. Well, he called that a rant, a strong rant, and he based that on Matthew 25. We know that in Matthew 25, especially, is known for the passage where Jesus is telling that when you visited me in prison, when you fed me when I was hungry, when you gave me drink when I was thirsty, you did that for me. And I understood that he concluded that to be a good man, to do good, it's enough for our salvation. And this, of course, is in direct relationship with the presentation that was made today for our preparation for Jesus' coming and for our salvation. But I believe that this is not enough. First, we can do good things for the wrong reason. Second, I think we have to add to Matthew 25, Acts 10. In Acts 10, it's the story of the Roman centurion Cornelius. This was a devout man. He was praying, and he was doing exactly what is prescribed in Matthew 25, doing good, helping people that needed help. And that was accepted in God's sight. But God considered that that was not enough for him. And he sent an angel, and the angel told him to call Peter and to explain in detail what more should be done. Peter came and told him, explained him that God has made Jesus the Lord of all, and also the judge of the living and the dead, and that in his name we have the forgiveness of our sins. Then I think we have to put together Matthew 25 with Acts 10 and put, in my view, Jesus first. And of course, we have to take care of our neighbors. The Apostle Paul, in regard to those that didn't know Christ, because this was raised in our discussions, what is going to happen with those that didn't know Christ? Well, Apostle Paul, I think, is explaining that God doesn't take in consideration the times of ignorance. But he made plain to us about his plans in Jesus Christ. Then this is what we have to put together. Jesus first, and then to help to do good to our neighbors.
When David had his rant last week, that was, I think, mostly in response to the question, what is the criteria for being saved? And I think the point that that is made in Matthew 25, and I have interpreted David to underline that, is that when push comes to shove, we are saved not on the basis of all the doctrinal fine print, but we are saved on the basis of having accepted Christ and having lived in the way that he wants us to live and to be there for others. And he says, if you are there for others, you're ultimately there for me. Now, what we have been talking about today is related, but it's different. When the question is asked now, if we are expecting Jesus Christ, and if we look at the world around us, what must we do? Must we preach or must we help? And I'm not suggesting for a moment that we should stop preaching and that we do not have the task to share our faith, of course, as Christians. But sharing our faith can never be isolated from actually acting out our faith. And so when people, as the true social gospelites, said, well, don't worry about talking about Christ, just do good. No. But on the other hand, when people say, okay, just, do good, leave that to others, because time is urgent. We must only be occupied with preaching, with evangelism, etc., etc. Then I would say those who say that have not understood what the gospel actually includes. And so these elements of preaching and acting must go together. And in many cases, of course, preaching in words does not help, where people are not actually waiting for us to say anything, but want to look at, and the more so, since Christians do not have such a good track record. Many people are suspicious of Christians. They're hypocrites. That's the general idea, it seems, in many places. So we must, as a church, as individuals and as community, emphasize the way we can live the gospel. And there is one thing more. Well, maybe many things, but one thing I want to mention, and that is we see lots of our young people leave the church. And they are interested in particular as to how our faith impacts on the issues in society, how our faith impacts on being relevant in this world. And we must learn better to do that if we want to keep them also in the community of the believers. So it's not one or the other, Brother Peter, but it's connecting them just as Christ has always connected them in his ministry.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'll see, go to Eduardo. Eduardo, you there?
Thank you again. Brother Reinder, who in the world thought that we will have in America kind of hatred against the Asians? We hear for the first time last week. You don't think that a hatred can come against us sooner or later?
You know, prediction is very difficult, especially when it concerns the future. And who knows what developments might actually take place in your society, in my society. I don't know. I find it difficult from a distance to actually understand why there is this hatred against Asians. Is it because they, by and large, have been reasonably successful? What is it? But throughout time, hatred has focused on particular groups of people for some reasons. You know, sometimes it was ethnicity, sometimes it was religion. Quite a bit of hatred from Christians that is focused on Muslims.
The thing about Christians, you should know, is that they prey on the vulnerable. They prey on those who.
I'm not hearing what was said, but
I think we got some background noise, Reinder.
Okay. But why the Asians are the target now? You know, there have been times, well, as I said, it was Jews, or it was sometimes, of course, the groups that are hated have not been communicating very well and have not played their role in society perhaps as good as they could have. So there's a lot of education involved, but there's also, hatred is one of these systemic things that we were talking about. And we'll have that with us, I guess, as long as Christ has not come. That is in human sinful nature, but let's do what we can to combat that. Starting in our own church, in our own community, dealing with the groups that maybe are not as popular as some others.
Thank you. David, can I make a comment for you? David, the other Sabbath school class that Roy started at Sligo Church this morning were about 150 visitors. I hope you can get jealous and do some advertising. But let me give a note that I have in my heart. The lessons that I hear every Sabbath have the tendency to disregard spirit of prophecy and the teachings of the church. I don't know if you see it that way or not, but I perceive that this is what is happening. Thank you to all of you.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. I'm going to go to another one, and I'm going to guess it's not Jeff. Donna?
Well, it's so.
One moment. I'd like everybody to repeat after me. Reinder. Not reindeer, not there, but Reinder.
Reinder.
And good luck with the last name.
But my spell check always defaults to reindeer.
Yes.
Then they have to say Bruinsma. I don't know. I can't do it like Afid. Bruinsma, right?
Yeah. Well, keep trying.
Oh dear. So many thoughts, and in reaction to so many of the comments. I wanted also else to give an anecdote about my relationship to Catholicism. My family, my mother's family was originally Catholic. We became Adventists, as I've said that story before. And what we found initially, and I think many have, is that Adventism was kind of alienating. It not only are we as a community or a group, were we for a long time alienated from the larger society, but within families, as many, I have many anecdotes. One part of the family became Adventist from a Baptist background. Lots of acrimony and a lot of hostile interactions. Another part of the family became Adventist from Lutheranism, the Swedish part of the family. Again, a lot of acrimony. And the Sabbath made a big difference because we were so convinced about the correctness, the righteousness of going to church on the seventh day. And we had a lot of castigating things to say about people who went to church on Sunday. And now, as the years have gone by, what has formed a bridge, interestingly, is not theology, not preaching. What has formed a bridge within the family, and I think to another, on a more global level, between our church and the outside world, has actually been good works, if you will. It's been the medical field. People now, they know about Adventism. They're happy to come to an Adventist hospital. They're listening to the message about healthful living and diet and exercise and vegetarianism and so forth. These things, which may seem like feeding the hungry or coming from a good works point of view, have formed bridges for us. And that's happened within my family, and it's happened, I think, on a larger sense. On the other hand, we're not unique in that. If you look at the history of medicine, for instance, the Catholics, many clinics and hospitals, medicine was a big part of their work. Social gospel was a big part of their work. Baptist hospital, you go across the United States and you'll find how many Good Samaritan hospitals, how many Baptist hospitals and medical centers. So I think Christianity as a whole, never mind the individual cells in which we live, has realized or has stumbled upon the fact that when you give a piece of bread to a hungry person, or when you bind up the wounds of someone lying by the road, that is when you are demonstrating the goodness of God, whether your God is a Baptist God or a Lutheran God or a Seventh-day Adventist God. And that's really all we have. That's our only medium of exchange, ultimately, I think, with other people. One thing I wanted to mention, and that's separate in response to Rodney, there are levels of certainty. Assurance is not monolithic. And I think that those levels of certainty vary from individual to individual and from time to time. It depends a lot of time on what's going on around us. Sometimes when you pick up the telephone and you find that your beloved or your mother has just died, and that the level of certainty is feeble, or the ability to feel that assurance is feeble. But as time goes and you study the issue more, it becomes stronger. And that's, I think I'll stop there. I don't know if Reinder has.
Yeah, just a short reaction, and that is the relationship between us in families and between us and people around us and society at large, of course, depends very much which part of the world you're in. And, you know, most of you are living in Southern California, where Adventists are reasonably well known, and where we have a significant institutional presence. That is a lot different, for instance, when you compare that with the situation in many of the European countries, where we are still looked upon as a small sect by many, and where we don't have the kind of institutional presence, and where, yeah, we are really struggling to maintain the kind of presence that we had. And it depends very much from context to context how people react to us being Seventh-day Adventists or becoming Seventh-day Adventists. But maybe we haven't really prepared people very well when they became Seventh-day Adventists, how to relate. Because very often they have a very, very strong missionary spirit. And that does not always make ties stronger. On the contrary. So we may have to, well, we may not, we have to pay more attention to those particular aspects as to how we tell people to relate and help them to relate in a positive way. But yeah, if you make the other your enemy, then that gives feelings of animosity, and that has a very negative influence. So, and that is our individual neighbor, but also denominations, how we work, also as theologians and pastors, etc. How do we communicate with one another? How do we show appreciation for the work that others are doing? And we have a long way to go, but in many places. But you are in many ways in a much more easier situation in your US context than you are in many other places in the world.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Forrest, can I have 10 seconds?
Hang on, no, hold on. I've got somebody else first.
Well, Donna has a response.
I wanted to respond just briefly.
Oh, all right, Donna.
Reinder said, which is Europe has such a long history of sectarianism, and you know, I mean, they were burning each other over the doctrine of transubstantiation and things like that. You know, does the bread really become God's flesh or not? Well, tie you to a stake and light the fire if you don't adopt my particular way. And again, within I think we just have retained some of the worst aspects of more traditional groups. When we became Adventists, my uncle, who was a Knight of Columbus and a firm Catholic, came and said, "You're damned to hell for eternity because you've left your first faith." And he was quoting the Bible to us. Felt very strongly, just as Adventists feel very strongly, if you present the message, they don't accept it, shake the dust of that house, or off your feet and go on to somewhere else. So it's intrinsic, perhaps, within Christianity and with other religions. I mean, and the Muslims are the same. If you have the opportunity, you don't accept, then you have to be eliminated in some way, or at least cast out. So that's the fundamental thing that needs to change. We're not the only ones, and I think we have evolved, if I could use that term, and we are better than we were 100 years ago, perhaps 1,000 years ago, in many parts of the earth.
In most places, yes. Yeah.
Okay. 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 I want to go to Terrence.
Well, I've had so many thoughts. Thank you again, Reinder. It's very nice always to hear your presentations. They've caused many thoughts, but I like the way we were going. Someone was discussing the fact that they were wondering how we could convert hope, or how compare hope to assurance. Well, it seems that we convert hope to assurance through faith. Faith in the story. Okay. And the story we have is a story that's been told for many, many years, back through Abraham, back through Noah, to the beginning of the Bible history. But at various points along the way, people have added to the story things that have made it uncomfortable for people to accept it. And I think of Abraham adding to it, and of course the Bible says God told him to, but the circumcision thing, this pretty much precluded anyone from converting unless they were really, really serious. And I would ask the question, what has the Christian religion added to the story that has further complicated it, to the point that you indicated, I believe, that the most Christian part of the Netherlands is the most fearful of dying, when in fact there is no fear in dying if you believe God is love. Because if you believe God is love, there's only two things going to happen. Either God doesn't exist, in which case you're dead and that's it, or God does and you have faith that God is loving, in which case everything's fine because he's not going to hurt you. But we have all this fear that cripples our message. Where does it come from? Why do we hold on to it? Why can't we have a loving God story? We might want to live as Adventists. That's fine. You want to live as a Baptist? That's fine too. You want to be a Catholic? That's fine too. But why don't we have a God story that doesn't have all the strings attached?
Yeah. Well, you know, Paul speaks in a number of places about the glory of God, and that we should, you know, do everything to his glory. And the word that he uses is doxa, which has also the connotation of reputation. And so we should be sure that we protect God's reputation, and that we present a kind of God that is true to who he is as best as we can, because we are human, and of course there's this distance between us and him. And when you come, for instance, to the doctrine of predestination and some of the other things that people believe about God, then I think we are ruining his reputation. Then we make a loving God into a kind of capricious God. And so that is, I think, the essence that, and we have to be careful, because before we just accuse others, that we also, as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, take care of God's reputation. And that we make sure that we see him as a God of grace rather than a demanding God. Well, you can fill in the details. So, but that is Christians have hurt not only the reputation of the Christian church very often, and of fellow Christians, but the reputation of God.
Yeah. And that's out there. That's out there. That story is out there. Everyone knows what Christians are doing in this country, what Christians have done throughout the ages. And someone asked previously, when are we going to repent for what Christianity has done? And until Christianity is willing to be honest with itself, you ask the question, will we be around for another 1,000 years? And if so, what will we be like? I would say if we're around in another 1,000 years, we have become more flexible.
Well, again, I'm not going to make predictions about the next 1,000 years.
Well, I would say becoming more flexible would be a good thing to become right now.
That would be a good start, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We're going to
All
have
right,
to
David.
quit, Forrest.
David, coming to you, but I have Eduardo. He wanted to respond, but I'm going to leave that decision up to you.
Okay, we don't have time, Eduardo. We'll continue it, but I would like to say this. I think we as a people are having a difficult time dealing with Ellen White responsibly right now. I think on the one hand, we can be too gullible, and on the other hand, we can be too hostile. And one of the goals I have is to continue Roy Branson's ability to not be gullible and not be hostile. So that's one of the missions I think we have as this particular class, but we'll deal with that more. Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma. And we will look forward to your next series with us. Here's the benediction. I'm sorry we ran over a little bit. I'm going to have to turn everything off when we quit rather than leave it open for more conversation.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And you'll see us from time to time. And who knows, I'll be doing something again in the future. Thank you, David. And
Thank you.
all.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Elder Bruinsma.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reinder.
Thank you, Dave, and Forrest, and everybody else.
Yes.
Thank you, Reinder.
Thank you, Reinder.
Yes, and happy Easter to all of you.
And to you too.
And a blessed Easter, I should say. Yes.
Bye,
See you all.
Bronwyn. Bye,
See you all in
Bronwyn.
1,000 years.
Bye, McKinley.